a real pleasure to welcome Goli Rezai-Rashti to campus. Goli is a professor of education, and she's now actually in administration. She's Associate Dean of Graduate Programs in the Faculty of Education at the University of Western Ontario. Goli's research interests are broadly in the fields of sociology, critical policy analysis, and post-colonial studies. She has published extensively in reference journals which deal specifically with issues related to the intersection of gender, race, class, and sexuality. Her work also has focused on the impact of neoliberal education reform in Ontario, with specific implications for teachers and policymakers. More recently, her research has focused on globalization and educational restructuring, and issues of male teachers shortage and women and higher education in Iran. Her scholarship has been published in international reference journals such as the American Educational Research Journal, Gender and Education, Discourse, Curriculum Inquiry, and Critique. And Goli has a co-authored book out, just coming out, hot off the presses, Routledge, co-authored with Wayne Martino, titled Gender, Race, and the Politics of Role Modeling. And this is what it looks like. But I won't share this out. I mean, I may not be a great pedagogue, but I know enough that everybody will be reading this rather than listening to her, if I do. So today, Goli's talk is entitled Women and Higher Education in Iran. And of course, Iran is very much in the news, so this is somebody who knows something about Iran from the inside and very different from the kind of news ways of looking at Iran. Subtitled Negotiating Between Modernity and Tradition. So without much
I shifted the
You've
title
shifted the title.
a little
Okay.
bit.
Negotiating Modernities and Traditions.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And it is really a pleasure to be here. As Handel mentioned, I'm very busy now with the administrative position. This is something new to me. But when Handel invited me to come here, I thought that I could do a talk for you too about my new research in Iran. There are not many people who are doing research in Iran. We know that doing research under repressive state is very difficult. So actually I'm writing a paper now talking about how difficult it is to do research and how some of the ethical consideration that Western universities perceive as very important have to be ignored if we are really doing research. So, but that's the topic of another paper. Years ago, when I was doing my PhD thesis, I was working on Iran, and that was a different time when we had a monarchy in Iran, and I was very critical of that system too. I'm not going to go too much into that, but since 2006, I became really involved. I thought about what is happening that is interesting. And there is an avenue opening for research. So I applied for SHERP, and I got a grant from SHERP to do research in Iran. And what was interesting to me that many people didn't know in the West was that more than 60% of the university population are women at the undergraduate level. The perception that many people in the Western countries have about Iranian women is oppression, legal changes and compulsory veiling. But what I have seen there, it was really a lot more complex than what is reported in the Western media. And some of the academics in the West who is talking also, both Iranian and Western academics who are talking about Iranian women. and the situation with education. So that really interested me to go and do my research there. And again, I'm not talking about the difficulties of conducting research there, but what I found out. So I wrote several papers, but I thought that what I'm going to focus on today is looking at how women's access to higher education is changing the nature of gender relations in Iran. And although they're facing unemployment, although there are many issues legally and culturally that is happening there, but there is always a tension when you're working on gender between structure and agency. And women are really, I thought with my research, talking to women, that they were able to use some of the traditional and cultural and Islamic stuff to make it in a very modern way, to use it in a modern way to their own advantage. So it's not they're there that, okay, it's okay if you oppress me, but there is a sense of agency that they use some of the cultural issues to their own benefit, and I'm going to talk about it a little more. So I'm going to focus less on unemployment and employment, but working more in terms of gender relations. When we talk about Iran, or any other country for that purpose, we have to understand that the regime is not really a homogeneous kind of regime. It has gone through different kind of periods in the last 30 years. So if you look at, in this talk, I'm going to talk about a little bit to give you perspective about what happened since 30 years ago. I divided up those periods into 3 periods. One is the highly ideological, when the revolution happened, what happened to women and education. And then there was the time of liberalization and reform, which took 15 years, and now we have a new sort of fundamentalist kind of regime in place. And, but of course, again, the regime is not homogeneous, it's facing challenges from different groups, and different groups, their ideas about women are quite different, although they're all religious, but they have very different views of women. So when the revolution happened, there were some drastic changes to the previous regime's reform around women's issues. For example, polygamy during the previous regime was restricted. Men had to get permission from their first wife to get married again. And so when the Islamic government came to power, at the beginning they said all of those laws have to be abrogated. Women could not be judges. Islamic Cultural Revolution closed the universities for 3 years in order to purge some of the faculty members and revise curriculum. They tried to Islamicize the education. Sex segregation became very dominant. Like if you go to the Iranian universities, boys sit in one side of the room, women sit in the other side. So, but it doesn't mean that there is no interaction with them. So they're still meeting with each other, dating, and doing all those things that Western women do. They also advocated that when the revolution happened, that women should not work outside of the house. Their main job would be to take care of the children, to take care of their house, and so many professions became forbidden for women to work because they thought that it affects the family relations. So you could go to education, becoming a teacher would be the most suitable job. But many of the government jobs or becoming a judge, because the perception was a woman is weak, and not as strong as men to be a good judge. So, okay, you I'm just having a little difficulty clicking. Okay. Then the period from, during the previous period, some of the fields of the studies were actually forbidden for women to enter. Some of the engineering fields and some other fields that, quite a few of them. Agriculture, for example, was forbidden. Mining was forbidden to women because they were perceived that they cannot go to those professions. But in 1990s, when the war with Iraq was over, there was a period of liberalization. I would say actually, probably, despite of all the tension, this was the best time in revolutionary times for Iranian women to exert themselves. So it was removal of all the quotas for women in higher education. They could enter to almost all fields of studies. Rafsanjani, who was the president of the country at that time, called on the female population to strive to take their 50% share of the country's educational programs. He really advocated for women to go into education. But the idea was that the education provides women to be a good mother, to be, for domestication, basically. And there were the emergence of independent feminist movement, NGOs. So there was a dynamic feminist press that many people, actually many feminists worked on that. The number of publications that came out is amazing. Then in 1997, Khatami came to power, who is a famous reformist, and actually some of his cabinet members, including one of the vice presidents, became a woman. So he established organization to support women's rights, and so very in this period we see that women really overtook men in higher education. But there are many reasons for that. I mean, if you talk to some of the cynics, they would say that they get there because men are not interested to go to university, that's why women are there. But I think the fact of the matter is that for many women, this is an avenue that they can improve themselves and to have a voice. If we look at the statistics, we will see that from 1983, gradually the number of women in universities in terms of percentage increased. This is, in order to go to university in Iran, you have to pass an entrance examination. So you can see the number of women who apply to go to university is a lot more than men. It's not that they're smarter than men, they get into university, but the number who are applying to go to university is a lot higher. Okay. And this is another thing that is quite interesting in Iran. So if you look at, compare it with Canadian universities, of course, humanities, we have 61% women in Iran, but look at science. This is really amazing at the undergraduate level, the percentage of women in universities. And then we have in agriculture, 51% of them. Technical and in engineering, if you compare it with Canada, you will see the same trend, probably. Or I would say in Iranian case, might be a little higher. Medicine, 73%, and arts, 74%. So you can see that although in engineering they are not at par with men, but in all the other fields they are exceeding. And if we compare it with Canadian university admissions in those fields, you will see some differences. In one of the universities that I did my research, I went to mathematics department, and it was really surprising to me that 70% of the undergraduate students were women. That's something that doesn't happen here. So it was very interesting phenomenon for me. Um, so when we get to Ahmadinejad era, which you're hearing a lot of things in the news, now there is a power struggle between the spiritual leader and the president in the country, and so he's making into the news, especially when he went to New York and he made all those comments that there is no gay in Iran, and so he basically doesn't think before he talks a lot of times, but there are a lot of issues that have been discussed in the parliament, although none of them got into a resolution to become law. For example, there was this discussion in the parliament about why there are so many women in universities, and they have to probably have quota in different fields to have equality for men, because it looks like women are superseding men in every field, so that's not going to be accepted. So there are many discussion and repression of women rights activists, like NGOs are having more difficulties to get support. So there are restrictions, but it doesn't mean that women are not participating, or they are not, like every day that you are there, you open the paper, you will hear something. There are many newspapers in Iran, unlike Canada, which you have Globe and Mail, Toronto. In Toronto, we have Toronto Star. I'm sure that you have Vancouver Star here, something similar. But in Iran, there were about, at some point during the reform government, about 40 different kind of papers in Iran. And now you have actually about 10, 12 on a daily basis. So what you hear about the lack of democracy to some extent is true, but at the same time, there are different groups who are resisting, and they're putting out, although they go to prison, but they're still advocating. So my research, I did qualitative research. I did 51 interviews with male and female. I went to 5 different universities, and in Iran, you cannot, the connections to do research is very important, and like anywhere else, but in Iran is specifically important, because it's not only that the university can give you permission to go to do research, the government has to give you permission to do research. And then in every university, you have this political agency that is connected to the government. So even though you pass through the academic faculty members and deans, but they can decide if you can do research or not. So when I went to do my research earlier, the president of some of the universities were reformists, because it was just right after the revolution, the reform was defeated. When I went there, the following year, although I had permission to do research, they told me you cannot do research anymore, because the president of every single university I wanted to do research was changed. When the president changes, the university presidents change too. They don't have, the universities do not have that kind of autonomy, so they're connected to the state. So anyway, with so much connections and difficulties and knowing some of the faculty members, I was able to do my research. And I would say that it was basically an underground research, because I was not really allowed to do the research. A lot of times I went to universities, they were asking me what you're doing here, because you have to show your ID cards. I would say that I'm a professor, which I believe was true, but not in that university, so I have to get away with a lot of things. So part of it, I asked a group of women to tell me what prevented them, because the statistics is not, if you look at unemployment statistics from Iran, which I'll show you in a minute, 7-8% of men are unemployed with those who have higher education. But for women, the rate goes to 19%. So many, about 20% of women who have higher education, they're unemployed. But the unemployment rate is high in the country, and we're going to talk about the reasons for that. What so many women told me that you can only get jobs if you have good connections and network. So if you have network, it doesn't matter what your field of study is, you can get jobs anywhere that you want. So those kind of connections, which we call in Persian partibazi, was very common. And when I was there, when I was working in Iran, it was very common, and I found out that still it really predominates in the country. And some people really discuss the difficulty of being in certain kind of environment that is more religious than others. Actually, many young people that I talk to, they believe that going to private sector is a lot better for them because there is less restriction than getting government jobs, or many banks in Iran are connected to the government. So what they do before they hire you, they go to do a neighborhood search about you. They find out if you're praying 5 times a day, if you're, there are those kind of restrictions for everybody, for both men and women to gain employment. So you have to show that you're really a good citizen in their case. So many young people that I talk to, they believe that it's not, there are too many restrictions to gain government employment because of all of those restrictions. And in fact, some people that I knew very well, they were denied jobs because the neighbors reported that this kid, listened to this kind of music and is not praying 5 times a day and so on. But the government also economically is really important to look at the country, that it is a capitalist economy. So the private sector is striving too in some ways. So many young people were thinking of getting into private sector employment. One of the women that I interviewed, she talked about how she was not promoted because they told her because she's a single woman, she could not get promotion to higher administrative position. And I was surprised, and I asked her what being single has to do with anything. Oh, I could distract men, and so that, and some other women told me that they really don't like to go into administration because there is so many restrictions. Then they're going to watch you to see if you're praying 5 times a day, if your Islamic hijab is really Islamic, and so on. So that was interesting to me because I never thought about that. But what I found, and was really most striking to me, that how women's access to higher education is changing the nature of gender relations in Iran. First of all, traditionally, women were always less educated than men at the time of marriage. And what happened in the process of women accessing higher education is that many men are less educated than them. So many men are reluctant to marry a woman who has more education than them. But for women it was also a problem because many families thought that this is not acceptable. I mean, my daughter is more educated than the guy that she's going to marry. So there was this tension between making more money, less money, more educated, less educated. Many male students that I talked to, they felt that there is a tension, there is a period of transition. They're losing their certain kind of powers. They didn't know what their role was anymore because they lost some of those authority that they exercised without question before. So one of the women that I interviewed, she said, there is no difference. This one who was attending and getting a PhD actually, she was saying that how intimidated she was with men, but then she got into university, she was empowered in some ways because she didn't see any difference. She was sort of a very intelligent woman, and that sort of empowered her, and she felt very comfortable and equal to men. This was a university professor who was very young, and she was telling me that when I was studying towards my bachelor degree, I had many proposals for marriage. After entering master's degree, the number of proposals decreased, and by the time I entered PhD program, it became non-existent. So you can see that how it's affecting the relationship, and women were really talking about it. And this was a woman who was married. She was doing her PhD, and she was already secured with a job at the university, but her husband had a master's degree. And she told me that I wanted my husband to be accepted in the PhD program. He wanted it too. We both liked it. One of my conditions for marriage was for him to get accepted. I wanted my husband to be at the same level of education. I'm just bringing a few of them that I thought that, and this woman is quite interesting, the way that she put it together. The more education I had, the more worried I was getting. First of all, there would be fewer cases of men who would propose to me. Many men might even be afraid to approach. I think men have trouble to be involved with someone who has higher education than them. It rarely happens. So I think that this became, access to higher education, I would say, became a problem for women in terms of their future chances for some of them who wanted to have a family. But also education gave them some access to job market, to have a voice, to accept their authority in the family. So it became a solution and a problem both at the same time, which is a contradiction. So we look at, I talked about it a little bit. So we look at unemployed men and unemployed women. If you look at just that section, we will see that there are 19.2% women who are unemployed and 7.4% men who are unemployed. But the other thing that one has to understand, that women in Iran themselves, they do not accept many jobs unless if the job is sort of accepted by their families, or men could do any jobs despite of having higher education or not. So women felt that they have to get government jobs, they have to be in a secure position, they have to be a position that would be accepted by their family, whether their husband or or their fathers and mothers and so on. But in general, what I would like to say, I'm not sure how I'm doing with my time. If we look at the share of women in academic positions, in general there are about 20% women university professors that are gradually increasing, but slowly. If we look at graduate students also, I talked a lot about undergraduate students, but then the number of graduate students who are doing PhD and masters are about 26%. So 75% of graduate education is dominated by men, those who are getting PhDs. So that's why the statistics, when you look at the statistics as a whole, there are about 52 or 53% women in universities and 47% men. because the number of graduate schools, and although there is not officially any restriction for women into getting to graduate schools, but what they were telling me, that there is a real bias because they have to go through an interview. And the interviewer usually have a quotas in their head. They say that no, we cannot accept so many women into the graduate programs, and that's why women did not get there. But my feeling is that in the next few years, the number is going to increase, especially with unemployment. For women, they have no choice but to go to graduate schools. And the number of those who are applying to go to the graduate school is increasing drastically at this point. So this is basically the way that we can look at it. You see that the PhD level is very low, but at the same time for professional doctorate, the number is quite reasonable, I would say. But for master's and PhD, especially PhD, is a lower percentage of women who go into the PhD program. And one of the reasons might be that many of them get married after they get their bachelor degree. When we look at the marriage market, actually, the way that it's going, the women are fearful of having a lot of education. It's no surprise that many women are not in the PhD programs, actually. In terms of, if we make a comparison between Iran and other countries in Middle East, we will see that that Iran is not doing a lot better than other countries. And the statistics usually varies, but the recent statistics that I got, 15% of women are really in paid employment. And one of the reasons that economists are talking about is the oil economy and having a capital-intensive kind of investment in the country. Because we have oil economy, the money comes in. And some economists believe that because men earn money that can survive the whole family, for women there is no need to work. So it's very different than other countries that women have to work because they have to sustain the family. So in that case, it's quite different for women. So the oil economy, capital-intensive, paid-intensive labor force participation is very dominant in the country. So it's not only gender ideology that is preventing women from employment, but also the way that Iranian economy is working. And more recent statistics actually shows that about 20% unemployment in the country, and men, young men, are going into private sectors because there is no employment for them. So the country is in crisis in terms of economy, not politically only, but also economically. And with all the sanctions that is happening from Western countries, that's not helpful also for the young people. So my conclusion is that women have made really considerable access to higher education, but their participation in the labor market remain stagnant in some ways. Unemployment rate is higher for women. And we have to see really unemployment, because we might come to a conclusion, which many people do, that there is gender ideology that is preventing women to work. It might play a role, but the dominant part, I think you have to look at the structural factors and the socioeconomic factors. And the practice of mehriye, which I didn't talk about, and I'm going to spend a little bit time because I will finish with that in 5 minutes. That was the most interesting thing that when I went to do my research, I was not concerned about it at all. But when I went and I saw that there are men going to prison because they cannot pay, Mehri is a nuptial agreement that men agree at the time of marriage to pay to the woman. And the woman can claim this amount of money or gold anytime during the marriage or during divorce. When I was studying in Iran, when I was a young person in Iran, we would say that we don't want to put a price on ourselves and we wouldn't accept mehri at all. But what I have seen in Iran with my research, because I saw that many men are going to prison, and I didn't know what was, like they're going because they cannot afford to pay the mehri. So I said, what is happening? Why women are asking for such a high mehri if the guy cannot afford? Many female students that I talked to, they said that because we don't have legal rights to divorce, because we don't have legal rights to the custody of the children, this is our bargaining power, actually. It's not in a traditional way that we ask for mehri because we were not working, we wanted to have a secure kind of future. In case if men would get engaged in polygamy, we would have a choice, so we would have some money. But they were saying that it's not money at all that is an issue, but it will give them a bargaining power with men at the time of divorce. So if the man said, I don't give you right to divorce, I would say that I want my mehri. So that's why many men were actually in prison. And the government was seriously thinking about instituting some laws to put a limit in the amount of mehri. I thought that with educated women, probably that will not be an issue, but I found actually with educated women, they're more and more asking for higher mehri. And they said, no, this is the right to my children, this is the right to divorce. But I said that, but you can have a prenuptial agreement to give you a right to divorce, because this was instituted during the reform government. They said, oh, the time of marriage is not to put a legal paper in front of my husband, to ask my husband for this kind of signature, but to do this, to ask for mehri, high mehri, would be something that would be acceptable. And even some women went through a struggle with their own families, because their families were asking for more mehri for their daughters. And women sometimes would say that, no, I'm not going to impose that because the man might not accept that, and they would get away with it. But the main reason for it was that women used these traditional means in order to exert some of the laws that they lost in the process of the revolution. And that was probably the most interesting part of the research for me there. So I'm going to end with that, and I'll be happy if I can entertain questions.
Just to clarify with the mehri, do they have to pay it then at the beginning, or are you saying that they don't pay it and then
they don't pay it, but the woman could ask for it at any time.
Okay, so then they hang on to that as the
Right, right. It used to be at the time of divorce, but now women can ask any time, you know. And I think I had a slide, but I'm not sure what. Because what one woman said was quite interesting for me. Because one woman who was divorced, actually, she told me that I had a lot of difficulty with my husband. She was a student, she was a master level student, but I could not make him to divorce me. So I said that, okay, I'm going to use my mehri then. Give me my mehri. That was the only way that I could get my divorce. And that was my security, actually. So, and many people I talked to, they were telling me that you cannot look at this as a traditional means, because it's not traditional anymore. It's a modern way of women exerting their agency to look at the laws that they lost in the process. I cannot get to that, it will disappear in the cyberspace. Yes.
How do you account for the increase in enrollment at the undergraduate level? I mean, in medicine,
It's very
70.
high.
So what are the sort of societal factors that contribute to that?
I think that with sex segregation, although we might look at it as a very negative thing, it is negative in some sense, right? But it brought opportunities to women, actually. Because then you have to create, if you say to women that you can only see female physicians, then you have to train female physicians. There are jobs that I have seen in Iran that I have never seen anywhere in the West. For example, people who do driving tests. The government instituted only women can examine female who are going for a driving test. So I would see this woman walking and then all these girls behind her, going. This kind of job never existed. The sport became segregated. Then you have to have women news broadcaster. So there are this whole category of women who are doing this kind of job. So the process is quite interesting in a way, because again, it's positive and negative at the same time. Okay, we have to have teachers, math teachers in the schools. In female schools, we cannot have, although we have now many math teachers. But at the beginning, they instituted that it has to be only women. So here you train all those science, math, women teachers to go to high schools. So segregation, although appears very negative in the Western eye, but it benefited women in some ways. And one cannot ignore that there are many jobs that women do that you don't see it Canadian women do, for example. So that's an interesting kind of tension there. And with physicians, of course, women can go to male doctors, but it is recommended that you go to female doctors. And of course, the government increased the quota at the beginning for women, but now more and more women go into medicine. Gynecologists, men cannot enter gynecological field. It's only women, 100% women can get to that field. So those are the kind of tension between. When I asked that why there are so many women in the education system, some of the responses were that traditional families previously would not send their daughters to universities or schools because they thought that public space was really corrupted during the previous regime. But since we have an Islamic government, it's sanitized in a way because it is Islamic, they go with their hijab, and the government assured them that everything is Islamic, the curriculum is Islamic. So therefore, many traditional families who would never ever let their daughters to go to universities, they are in universities. And the other thing which is very interesting about Iran is that many lower class, working class people get access to university because the state universities are completely free. But then you have private universities that are increasing drastically for middle class and upper class people. So there are all those kind of tensions in the country. But segregation could not be only looked at in that negative way because it brought opportunities for women too. Yes.
I'll beg to differ a little bit with you. First of all, like about the medical degree, look, many women went to study medicine and also to be teachers in the future at the Shah time too, because these jobs are very respectable in Iranian society. And but everybody wants to get to medicine or to be an engineer because they can get a lot of salary and it's a very high prestige job. So I don't think that your argument about segregation is correct to be applied to the medicine. I don't agree with you. And
But why
but the
all
thing that
women?
you say that, okay, traditional families send their daughters to schools after the revolution because they thought it's a safe and it's Islamic environment. I think that was true just for a few years after the revolution.
Right.
But we are right now 32 years after the revolution. So I found that argument a bit shallow and not really expanding, and the Iranian society has changed a lot during the last 32 years, and
Right.
I don't believe
How do
that
you
argument
explain
is.
that though? Well, how do you explain why 70% of women are medical doctors? What will be your explanation?
But it's traditionally, in every family. Like my parents wanted to force me to study natural sciences in order to get to medical universities, because the foremost argument is that if you become a doctor, you can get a job everywhere in the world and always in Iran. At that time, it wasn't about. And also, you will be your own master. Like they say in Farsi, "Nokar khodat akhir ba." You'll be your own master, and it's the best profession. And it's been always like that since I was a child. I'm right now 40-something years old, and like families wanted their children, no matter which sex, to be doctors. Yeah, and if you are a doctor, even in Islamic value system and that kind of things, you are safe. Yeah, like because it's okay with them, for the women, and also. Well, women too. But there is a big, the big competition to get the medical school first. Yeah, and also, like the system of examination in Iran is you go to a general examination, concours, which millions of people participate, and then after they give you a rank, like you are number 1,000. I was number 1,200. And then you have a choice to choose which program you want to enter. And everybody there is this assumption in the society that people who are in the natural examination, everybody first choice is medicine,
Yeah.
and then they come down, because this is this
The
ranking
same
in
thing
the
is
society.
here. The same thing is in Canada.
That's true,
yeah.
yes.
So my
it's
argument is very different than yours in that sense, that I am trying to look at it objectively with research to show that there is a reason that 74% of the medical school students are women. Previously, during the Shah's regime, they were mostly men. Therefore, the total population of female university students were 26% in 1979. But now, if you look at it, it's over 60%. But there are other issues that we can talk about. And it's not nice to say to someone that your argument is shallow. So you have to really agree to disagree with each other in a very polite way. And so this is the way that my research showed me. Probably your experience is very different, and I value your experience, and I don't think that you are speaking in a shallow way. So
No, I'm just saying about the medicine.
yeah, but medicine for men was always a privileged kind of field to enter, and now women are more and more getting into medicine. But one of the things that is happening, like many other countries, like Cuba, for example, is losing its value at this point because there are so many women who are medical doctors. And so the salary they earn is not probably very high. And I have seen so many people with medical degree who are not working in their fields. Because when you go to state universities in medicine, you have to sign a contract with the government to say that I will work 5 years in a rural area. Many women do not go to rural areas, and many men do not go to rural areas too. So therefore, it's a dilemma for the government because many women do not like to go to work in rural areas for some good reasons too.
It's exactly. I want to say that Iran society during the last 32 years is so complex and so many
Exactly, we're
factors
talking about that
contributing
complexity.
and changing that. But that argument to me, that argument of like saying that segregation helps, you know, like during the last 32 years constantly that like people, more women go to medicine. According to my experience, I'm not sure it's true in that way because it's so many complex things and then it's so changing every year because the government is so arbitrary and rules that I'm not sure it's true.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about how some of this affects high school education. So one of the reasons I'm asking, and I'm surprised there must have been a miscommunication, she's not here. I'm working with a student from Iran who is looking at education in Iran, especially based on her experience of teaching critical thinking in Iran at an earlier level, and the tensions of doing that, and in fact the dangers of teaching critical thinking in Iran. So what I'm curious about is if high school teachers have an awareness that a very large number, not only of boys but also of girls, are likely to apply to university, how does this trickle down and what kind of tensions does that create in their awareness of needing to educate both the boys and the girls in ways that equips them, including with things like critical thinking ability to enter university?
I think that in Iranian case, probably nothing much has changed since I was there in high school, because the environment is somehow that makes the students political. Like, it's very easy to go to university and talk about politics, although it's not allowed. For professors to talk about politics, although it's not allowed. For teachers to engage with that, although it's not allowed. Everybody tells me how dictatorial is the regime is, nobody can talk. But you can just sit in a taxi and the taxi driver will talk to you and talk about, oh, how expensive everything is, we have better get rid of this government. And so people talk about things. And because the state doesn't have that kind of legitimacy, I think that people are more political in that sense, including young people. And so issues of politics comes to mind all the time. Like even with the students that I was interviewing, although I was not talking about politics to them, they could distinguish between reformist and the conservative groups very well. And I would say that a lot of university students were sort of supportive of the reformist because they thought that it was to their benefit. And I interviewed some very religious fundamentalists too who had different views. But with the society somehow, whether you talk about politics or not, it is a political society. It's something that is in your face. And you cannot just avoid it. And every day people talk about politics. For teachers, they, of course, they cannot put it in their curriculum officially, but unofficially, the students know where they stand. In terms of hijab, for example, this is one of the examples that sort of if you're a female teacher wearing certain kind of hijab, the students know to what extent you are religious or not. So it's a form of resistance also. And some of the things that you see, I saw male and female students talking about relationships. The time that I was there, I would say that 30 years ago it was a lot more strict sexual relationships, but it's becoming more and more common. I was at a conference last weekend talking about temporary marriage in Iran, and one of the women who did the study with university students, many women actually, although temporary marriage was only for women who lost their husband or they're divorced, but she was arguing that many women now, they go through temporary marriage, and this is a way of modernizing dating. So they would say, okay, for this 3 months, you're going to get married, but no string attached, and of course, women cannot be married and do that, but men who are married, they can do that. So many women would say that I don't want to have a problem with the government, it's better to go through this temporary marriage, because this is the same concept of dating in the Western society, and it's really accepted by the government. So government really is promoting that too in recent years. So it's quite interesting things. I agree with Ted that it's really complex, the situation. But women are using some of these traditional means in order to exercise some of the things that they picked in.
I'm going to ask excuse me. I'm going to ask a different kind of question. This is very fascinating. Thank you for just a marvelous presentation. I'm curious about the political risks and the ethical issues attached to this kind of research that you've been doing. So earlier you mentioned that it was a form of underground or sort of covert research that you were doing. So I'm wondering, first of all, how did you get ethical clearance?
In Iran?
Well, not just there, but through your own institution here in Canada. I think you said it was connected to a SHIRT grant.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of what I'm curious about, and then the other piece is how much risk were you taking in Iran by engaging in this kind of covert research?
I think it is really a risky business to do research there. And you have to be really careful. It's not only to know the language and to know the people, but you have to be savvy politically, to know the politics and how it works. In the following years that I went to do research, I always took my husband, who's not Iranian. And I used deception, basically, to say I'm coming to see my family, I'm here with my husband, and they would not say that why you're coming so many times to Iran, why you're staying there, because at the border they check you, and they get suspicion. And I was questioned a couple of times that what I'm doing and why I'm here. I'm appearing so many times, and my mother still lives there, so I go to visit her. So I think it was no problem to get ethical clearance from my own university. But because I was dealing with adults, I could get signature from them. I think that is my issue, that when you want to do research in an ethical terms, in a country that is really repressive, you cannot go through institutions. Those gatekeepers should be out completely. And our universities have to understand that, not to use those gatekeepers. But if we are really dealing with adults, we could get in touch with them, we can get their consent, we can get them to sign. Like when I went to Iran, they were telling me, my relatives were telling me, oh, it's impossible for people to give you signature, to give you permission to do to interview them because they think that you might use the signature to report them to the government. But I really didn't find any problem. When I talked to people, they really valued the research. They wanted to support me. They wanted to help me. They wanted to tell me how they think. So it was no issue there. But I think we have to get rid of the gatekeepers if we want to do research in a repressive kind of situation. And it's not unethical, I would say. You just take gatekeepers out because you're still getting the consent of the people. But institutional gatekeepers have to be out, and because they wouldn't allow you to do research. I mean, I went with a proposal that was extremely positive. I said that I'm coming to find out this extraordinary participation of women in university, which was good for the government. But because government know that they have done terrible things in terms of legal system, and they put many laws in place that was not to the benefit of women. They knew that I might find something that would challenge their ideas about gender relations in Iran. So that's why they told me that I could not do research there. So it's not unethical research, but I would say take gatekeepers out, basically. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think so, and I wasn't implying that your research was unethical. I was
Yeah, I
just
know.
curious
I
about, normally Canadian institutions
Yeah.
prefer to have
I do research here all the
institutional
time,
approval,
yeah.
so I just wondered about that. Thanks.
And my university really wants that too. But a lot of times I interview the students outside of the university. I made arrangement that I could meet them outside of the university to interview them. Because when you enter universities in Iran, there is security. They check you before you go in. But I learned to behave in a way that they wouldn't see that I'm a foreigner coming in. I would be one of them. So they wouldn't even ask me for my ID. So, and if they would stop me, there was always a university professor who would support me, that I would go to see them. And through them, I would get their students to interview. So you have to have those kind of support. Otherwise, I could be like many other women who do research, they would go to prison.
So you had these connections
Oh, I
before
have
you
this,
went in.
and I established those connections. Yeah, I work with those people now. I basically publish with them, and so they have been a great sense of support to me. Yes.
Thanks very much for a very interesting talk. Can you tell us, I'm struck by the ways in which you talk about change taking place where people are using tradition, basically reworking tradition, and I love that. But almost all your examples were sort of that kind. And usually I would be arguing the other side. But I want you to say a little bit about, and the more I was thinking about it as you were presenting, this is what happens with, I mean, tradition is hard to break, right? And religion is hard to go up against. But what happens is, of course, what people are calling religion is also very traditional, and what we're calling tradition is also religion. So they're so imbricated that it's doubly hard to break through. And I really enjoyed the ways that you talked about people, it's a kind of counter-hegemonic moves. Like you marshal hegemony against itself in a way. You take the traditions and you work them. But what about, because you talked about feminist groups, etc., etc. What about other kinds of ideas? The idea of equality for its own sake, the idea of women's rights taken up outside of are there other frames that are possible? Is part of what I guess I'm asking, rather than we have this kind of religious traditional frame that we're working with, and everything has to be done within that frame. Are there other frames that people can put beside that? Does the educational system, for example, reference other things Are there ideas like, the notions of whatever, neoliberal market, the Marxism? Are there other things that are present in the society, in the educational system, or other things that people can draw on for group rights?
I think that the idea of equality, as I mentioned Handel before, you cannot really look at the government as homogeneous kind of government. Within the religious groups, there are groups who are supportive of equality, of women's rights, like reformist government and the Green Movement that happened in 2009. So it's not really, the country is a very complex country. So many feminist groups or people who are on the left, they rely on the reform to go ahead because they know that you cannot really have a secular government at this point. It's almost impossible. So the only hope for people is to look at the reform to see to what extent they can use the reform for the issues of equality, because that is the group that came up. I'll tell you that no groups, no politicians can get away becoming a government without looking at women's issues right now. If you want to create any alternative in Iran, because women's issues is playing such a dominant role, and women have such a voice now that I think that for any government to come up not talking about gender issues would be an impossibility. Like everybody has to, even including the new fundamentalist Ahmadinejad. I mean, he cannot just go along and, I mean, in 1980s or even 90s, you would go to the street and you would see the government militia checking women, and finding if the hijab was Islamic or not. But nowadays, I mean, there are few days they might go to the street, but there is really no restriction. So, but the amount of makeup that women make, I mean, it just was mind-boggling to me. Like, they wear heels like this. It's because you have repression, and I think that you behave in a way that it's with the media, I mean, media plays a very important role also. I mean, talking about the hybrid people, you wouldn't see those kind of women anywhere else in the world probably, as you work in the north part of Iran. It was mind-boggling for me to see. But the notion of equality is always, I mean, every group that comes to power, they try to reinterpret that. Okay? But with the Islamic government, if you have a religious government, you're against the God. I mean, they can do anything that they want to you because you're not, So, but within the government, there is a lot of differences of opinion. So that's what people are using to get to what they want. Like, for example, universities. Some universities are very religious, that people would never go to. But some universities are not.
Well, what does that mean? Because you keep going back to this frame.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's nothing outside of that frame. And I'm asking about those ideas and those other things that are outside of that frame. I hate to use, a Western model as what might come in as something different, but it is something different. So what I'm asking is not so much, do women wear high heels and a lot of makeup, but, are they reading Judith Butler? It's a different kind of question, right? So are there other ideas from outside or even from within? Because the frame seems so dominant, and I know people can work if you're intelligent or if you're, if you have enough agency,
Yeah.
you can work within a frame, you can twist it to your own purpose, all of that. You've articulated that very well. What I'm trying to ask, and it's interesting that one of your first answers was, yes, it's very different within the government, there's reformists, etc. But I'm not even asking about reformists, I'm asking, are there people out there who are, I don't know, anarchists, who are Marxists, who are something else,
Yeah.
other than how do they work within that
Yeah,
religious
they're
frame?
leftists, they're people who belong to different groups, but they're all underground because they don't have, because the democracy is really questionable democracy. Like you cannot run for the government unless if you're blessed sort of by the spiritual leader. So I don't know what kind of democracy is that. Like the presidential election, you cannot nominate yourself. I mean, a few years ago there were more than 100 women who nominated themselves, but none of them were, accepted by the spiritual leader. There was actually a documentary made out of that. So, of course there are different groups, but they're underground. Even the reform is underground right now after the 2009 election. I mean, the two leaders of the reform are under house arrest. So, and I think that, like anywhere else in the Middle East, that it is going through the turmoil and some sort of unrest. I wouldn't call them revolution really, because I think that what happened in Egypt was a military coup, and I'm not sure what is happening in other countries, but it's something will happen there because the society cannot continue like that. But then I'm sure that those journalists who are writing, who are bringing out newspaper, they have ideas about change. People are talking about democracy. People are talking about that there has not been any serious change in the country. I mean, why they made the revolution if they have no say in what is happening. But the other thing is the social imaginary. I mean, if we have been 2,500 years of dictatorship, it's the process of learning how to live together and to agree to disagree with one another. That is an issue in Iran at this point, and I think that and people are learning, probably. I remember that I saw a picture of Khatami, who was the reformist president, and it was very common for people to kiss the hand of the king or spiritual leaders like Khomeini. When people started to kiss Khatami's hand, he pulled his hand. He said, no politician deserves for you to kiss their hands. You should just stop doing that. I mean, for me, that was really meaningful because he was telling people you have a say. What you are doing is wrong, and you have to change some of the things that you have been doing previously. I think it's very to change people's social imaginary, and probably democracy is going to take a long time for people to think about or imagine what it could be.
I want also to give you an answer. Most of these people who had different frames, they even were persecuted, they were executed, they are in the prison or they left. There were some women activists and some of them were reformists and some were pretending to be Islamists, they were not. And they started something, they called it 1 million signature, 1,000 signature for the women's right to change the law, some of the law which is related to women. And that campaign was unsuccessful, they couldn't do anything. And most of the activists actually left Iran, I can name them. And also there was another movement, they tried to oblige government to sign to the Convention Against the Oppression of Women in the United Nations. Again, it was unsuccessful. And all these women left the country. And I can assure you, more than 90% of these people, they don't subscribe to this dream of reformation or reformist and the government at all, and many of this kind of like reformists or the government, people in the government who support the women, they may name women rights, women equality, but it's just a culture of hypocrisy. Because after the revolution, something that's become really big is the culture of hypocrisy. So these people pretending that they are like supporting women's rights, and they throw, has become the fashion nowadays. Everyone throws the name women and children there to say, we are like reformists, we are good people. But you can't imagine what kind of people these are. Like I went 2005 Iran, and one of the people I interviewed is this woman, Shahla Habibi, and she was the women's consultant to the president. And okay, you ask her, there is these things about beating of women, for example, in Quran. Oh no, that beating, some imam did it with the leaves of a tree, and it shows that if a man is dissatisfied with a woman, wants to show, is a means to show I'm dissatisfied with you, and it's with the leaves. And the way these people justify things, and they try even to judge this reform is, to me at least, is disgusting. And and what is the social imaginary for women? Is it that, okay, like you can go and become the temporary marriage with men, and who are these men? 99% military people related to the Revolutionary Guard. I have the experience that become these women marriage.
I'm not sure.
I mean,
Okay.
it's just.
I think you're overgeneralizing.
This
Probably next time you should come and give it a talk.
There was another.
It wasn't my next question. Can I just ask a question?
Yes, sure.
Thank you for your question. Going back to the 50s, and let's say the first Iranian election in the 50s, where Dr. Mossadegh was elected by everyone, and so there was there was a true sense of democracy right there. And I'm just saying, if that was still, if the Americans didn't intervene and the British, how would the identity of Iranian and the Iranian culture be contemporary?
If the
If
wouldn't happen,
Yeah,
the American wouldn't interfere.
yeah, that's right, and also the British. How would that be related to?
I'm sure that it would be a big change, and people would learn to that what democracy is, and because that was really a democratic kind of transition.
Sure.
And but Americans interfere in many countries, and they still do that.
Right.
So,
The thing was, it was a social democrat from the leftist perspective. Nationalization, like Canadians nationalized oil. All they were doing was nationalizing oil for them, and that was construed as a violation of American interest.
correct.
So what you're saying is Iran would have been a different.
Right. Constitutional revolution in 1906 in Iran was in some way a transition to democracy, which didn't succeed too. Then we have 1950s that American intervention happened, and in 1979, you know that what happened.
Right.
So I think that I would still say that I have never seen Iranian reading so many books. I mean, I went with my husband to a travel agent to get a ticket to go to another city, and the woman was reading Elizabeth Allende's book. And then she found out my husband was Chilean. She was very happy to show her the translation of Elizabeth Allende's book to him. So those are the kind of things that is happening. People are reading more. People are more educated than ever before. So it is a process that the country is going through. And I don't disagree that the situation is very bleak, but I'm not taking a political position. I'm taking a sociological position here talking about what I have seen, what I have done in my research.
Right.
I mean, when we talk about repression, 2 years ago I was in Iran and I attended a sociological association conference by University of Tehran. A university professor stood up and said that we cannot create theories because every theory is recommended by the government. I mean, to talk openly like that in a seminar, it just requires a lot of guts. I don't know where that guy is now. He might be in prison. But it requires a lot of, courage to talk like that. And so people are speaking up. And
What I was trying to say was that there's always an undercurrent in the Iranian history, and that both from the left and the right,
Right.
what has happened because of the intervention, people galvanized was the Islamic movement to take
they thought they were getting something better,
That's
but
right.
yeah, but it ended up being a lot more complex
That's
than
right.
what they thought.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So there are no more questions, thoughts. Please join me in thanking Professor Rashti.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. Please join me in thanking her.